Charleston, 1852. The night smelled like rain and rot. A single lantern swayed outside the butcher's alley, painting the cobblestones in trembling gold. Then, a sound. Wet. Heavy. Something being dragged. When the constable turned the corner, his light caught it. A man hanging upside down from a magnolia branch, his body glistening under the moonlight. His skin was gone, but his face, or what was left of it, was nailed to the tree trunk beside him, and on the forehead, stitched with black thread, one word: beauty. That was the first sign Charleston had a monster living among its saints. The city wasn't prepared for what came next. Charleston in the mid-19th century was a place of elegance, lace parasols, grand mansions, and laughter echoing from balconies. But beneath that charm, rot festered. The docks reeked of salt, sickness, and the iron scent of blood. Slaves carried coffins under the same sun that warmed their master's tea. And in this perfect balance of civility and cruelty, one man saw opportunity, Dr. Alaric Boone, a physician who believed death was just another kind of art. But before we continue this disturbing story, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves hidden stories. It helps bring more of these untold truths to light. Boone arrived after the yellow fever epidemic of '49. He called himself a restoration specialist, someone who could preserve the grace of life beyond the grave. People adored him. He treated the dead like royalty, smoothing their faces, painting their lips, stitching them with care. The wealthy women whispered his name with gratitude. The poor begged for his mercy. But no one ever asked how he did it, and Boone never told them that his obsession wasn't with saving the dead, but with perfecting the living. He kept a journal, neat, clinical, and horrifying. In it, he described the human body as a gallery of wasted potential. He wrote, "Skin is God's first garment, pure, pliable, divine, yet man mars it with age, disease, and sin. What if I could preserve it, refine it, immortalize it?" He began small, purchasing unclaimed corpses from the hospital. But soon that wasn't enough. He wanted texture. He wanted tone. He wanted what the living still possessed: warmth. The first disappearance was dismissed as drunken misfortune. A dock worker named Thomas Bell, last seen stumbling home through the fog. Then came Mary Holt, a washerwoman found dead near the river, her body strangely pale, her skin peeled like silk gloves. Then a third, a preacher's son, vanished after choir practice. By the fourth victim, Charleston was choking on fear. People said the devil walked among them. They said he came in a doctor's coat smelling of roses and decay. The police searched for patterns. There were none. But the collector, as he'd come to be known, had one rule. He only took what he considered beautiful. He sketched them before he killed them, often leaving drawings behind, graphite portraits so lifelike they almost breathed. Each face marked with a small magnolia. That flower would become his signature. No one suspected Dr. Boone. How could they? He was the one mending the broken, burying the dead, comforting the grieving. His surgery on Trad Street always glowed with warm candlelight. The curtains drawn, the sweet smell of lavender masking something far fouler beneath. His assistant once said she heard faint music from his cellar, a soft, rhythmic humming. Boone claimed it soothed his nerves while he worked. But she swore she heard whispers between the notes. Voices, crying, pleas that faded into silence. One winter night, the apothecary next door reported strange noises, something heavy being rolled across the floorboards, then the sharp hiss of steam. When he knocked, Boone appeared calm, immaculate, smiling. He claimed he was preparing a specimen. The apothecary never asked again. Weeks later, his wife went missing. Charleston was unraveling. Fear became its new perfume. Newspapers refused to print the full details. The church pressured silence. The mayor demanded calm. But whispers spread faster than ink. People claimed to see Boone's silhouette wandering the graveyards at night, carrying lanterns that burned blue. Children were told not to walk near the river, where pale faces floated up after every storm. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A fisherman, dragging his nets near Battery Point, caught something heavy. At first he thought it was fabric. Then he saw the face. Pressed flat, tanned, and pale as ivory. The eyes stitched shut. Around it, more, layer upon layer, folded neatly inside a wooden chest. 22 pieces in total, everyone labeled in perfect handwriting, name, age, skin type. At the bottom, written like a signature, A. Boone, Study for Perfection, number 12. By dawn, the entire city was in chaos. Constables stormed Boone's residence. Inside, they found blood under the floorboards, surgical instruments still wet, and sketches pinned to the walls, faces of men, women, even children, but none of them whole. Each missing a piece, a cheek here, a lip there, as if he was assembling something new. But Boone was gone. The back door led to the marshes, where footprints vanished into the mud. In his basement, they found a mannequin, life-sized, dressed in stitched human skin, seated before a mirror. It had Boone's own spectacles resting on its nose. On the table beside it, one final note. To see beauty, one must first strip away the lie that covers it. The room was silent except for the drip of blood falling from the ceiling. Upstairs, a single magnolia flower lay on the windowsill, fresh, unblemished, and impossibly white. For months, Charleston hunted for him. The collector became legend, his name erased from records. But the killings didn't stop. In the swamps beyond the city, hunters began finding strange figures hanging from trees, not bodies, but skins. Empty, cured, preserved like leather. And in the dead of night, some claimed they saw a lantern flickering deep among the reeds, moving slow, steady, as if someone were searching for something they'd lost. Some said Boone drowned. Others whispered he still walked the marshes, wearing the faces of those he'd taken, changing them like masks, one after another. But the old families of Charleston, the ones who still whisper his name at their dinner tables, know the truth. Because every few years, when the magnolias bloom under a blood-red moon, a new face goes missing, and someone leaves a white flower by the river. The magnolia on the windowsill was still fresh when the deputies arrived. They said its scent clung to the air for days, even after the shutters were nailed shut and the floor scrubbed clean. But no one dared stay long in that house. Not after what they saw in the cellar. Dr. Boone was gone. That much was clear. What wasn't clear was how he vanished. The mud outside showed no footprints leading away. The back gate was still locked from the inside. It was as if the man had dissolved into air, leaving only the stench of rot and the quiet hum of something unfinished. Sheriff Langdon ordered the place sealed. He told his men the doctor must have fled by boat, maybe bribed his way out of Charleston. But deep down he knew. Boone hadn't run. Boone had transformed. Weeks passed. The city, trembling under its own silence, pretended to forget. Funerals were held, churches filled, the magnolia trees bloomed white again. But beneath every whispered prayer the same dread lingered, that Boone was watching, that he had never left. Then, on a humid August morning, a fisherman from Stono River came running into the sheriff's office, white as bone. He said he found something, a crate tangled in reeds. Not like the others. This one was carved with a symbol, a magnolia. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a human heart, preserved in a jar, floating in amber liquid, and taped to the glass with surgical thread. A page torn from Boone's journal. Langdon read it once and ordered everyone out of the room. When his deputy, Elias Crow, later asked what it said, the sheriff's only reply was, "He's still working." Crow was a young man, barely 30, with the kind of moral backbone Charleston had long since forgotten. He'd fought disease, theft, and corruption in the city's darkest corners, but this was different. It wasn't crime, it was ritual. He began retracing Boone's steps, the hospital records, the mortuary logs, the church archives. Everywhere Boone had worked, Crow found the same pattern: missing cadavers, falsified death certificates, erased names. It was as though the doctor had been collecting the city's forgotten for years. One rainy evening, while searching the archives of St. Michael's Hospital, Crow found something the others had missed: a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the wall. Inside, a small leather-bound book, warped from humidity. It smelled of iron and vinegar. Across the cover, in fading ink, A title, Preservation Through Art, a treatise by A. Boone. But this wasn't a treatise. It was a confession. The first page was dated March 1851. Boone wrote of his frustration with the limitations of death. He described his early experiments on corpses that decayed too quickly, losing their essence. He lamented the failure of beauty under rot. The human form, he wrote, is an instrument. The skin, the outer hem of the soul, must be saved before the spirit's departure. If taken too late, the harmony is lost. He wrote of perfecting a preservation fluid, a mixture of mercury salts and rose oil, one that could keep flesh supple, almost alive. He wrote of his models, people he considered volunteers, chosen for their divine symmetry. He wrote of the work, something larger than any single piece. The body is a canvas, but I am building a cathedral. Crow turned the pages with trembling hands, each entry darker than the last. Boone recorded details of his victims, their ages, features, even the expressions he intended for them after death. He categorized them like colors: ivory, sable, rose, wheat, and at the end of each entry, a small symbol, a magnolia. But one entry stood out. No. 13. Subject, Lydia Boone. Lydia, his wife. Most of Charleston had forgotten her, a woman of rare beauty who vanished 2 years before Boone's disappearance. People whispered she'd died of the fever, but in the journal, Boone wrote something else entirely. Lydia resists the decay. Her form is the foundation. She will endure beyond flesh. Crow stopped reading. His stomach turned. He realized this wasn't just madness, and it was devotion. Boone wasn't killing strangers. He was building something, someone, from them, piece by piece. And if Lydia was the foundation, then the work was her resurrection. That night, Crow brought the journal to Sheriff Langdon. The older man barely looked at it. His hands shook too much to turn the pages. He told Crow to burn it, said Charleston didn't need another ghost. But Crow couldn't let it go. Something in those pages felt unfinished. Boone's handwriting grew frantic near the end, the ink smeared as if written in a hurry. The final entry ended mid-sentence. The heart beats faintly. The form awaits completion. The marsh calls. Tomorrow I will... Then nothing. Crow stared at that line for hours. The marsh calls. Boone's home was near the river, but his property bordered the vast, uncharted swamps west of Ashley Ferry, a place locals called Blackwater Hollow. No one went there after dark. Hunters claimed it swallowed sound, that the air itself seemed to watch you. Crow packed his pistol, a lantern, and a flask of holy water the priest insisted he carry. At dawn, he rode for the hollow. By noon, the humidity was suffocating. The deeper he went, the thicker the air became, heavy with the smell of rot and something sweet, like old perfume. The swamp buzzed with cicadas, frogs, and the distant rumble of thunder. Every few yards he found something wrong: a child's shoe nailed to a tree, a string of teeth hanging like charms, bones painted white and arranged in spirals. Boone's trail. Hours passed before Crow found the house. Half sunken, roof caved in, vines crawling up its sides like veins. Inside, everything was preserved in dust and silence. Medical instruments lay where they'd fallen. The walls were lined with glass jars, floating eyes, tongues, and hands, each labeled in Boone's handwriting. And in the center of the floor stood a wooden frame, draped in canvas. Crow approached slowly. He pulled the sheet away. What he saw made him drop the lantern. It wasn't a body. It was an assembly, parts of dozens, maybe hundreds sewn into a single form. A woman's frame, but taller, broader. The skin mismatched in color and texture, stitched with surgical precision. The hands were delicate, the face incomplete, one side still missing. And at the chest, beneath the ribs, something pulsed. A faint rhythmic flutter. Crow fell backward. The heart, it was moving. It wasn't alive in the way a man is alive, but something was forcing it to beat. The jar from the crate, the preserved heart, was gone. He realized with horror that Boone had done it. He'd reanimated it. Then he heard a sound, a voice, soft, gentle, humming. The same lullaby the doctor used to hum to the fever children. Crow turned. Boone stood in the doorway, gaunt, pale, wearing a coat that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. Too smooth, too supple. The realization came slowly. The coat was made of skin. Boone smiled. She's almost perfect, Elias. You see it, don't you? The symmetry? The grace? God made us impermanent. I only wish to correct his mistake. Crow raised his pistol. His hand trembled. You murdered them, he whispered. Boone shook his head. I preserved them. Their beauty would have rotted in the ground. I gave them eternity. The wind howled through the broken windows. The candles flickered. Boone stepped closer, his voice calm, almost pleading. You think this is horror, but this is devotion. Lydia will live again, not as she was, but as she should have been. Crow fired. The shot echoed through the swamp, scattering birds into the sky. Boone staggered, clutching his side, but he didn't fall. Instead, he laughed. Flesh is transient, deputy. You cannot kill what's already been perfected. He lunged. The two men crashed against the frame, sending the half-formed body toppling to the floor. The lantern burst, flames spreading across the room. Boone screamed, not in pain, but rage, as the fire consumed the walls. Crow crawled toward the door, smoke filling his lungs. Through the haze, he saw Boone kneel beside the burning figure of Lydia, cradling her as his skin blistered and blackened. We'll finish it together, Boone whispered, before the flames swallowed him whole. Crow stumbled into the swamp as the house collapsed behind him. By the time dawn broke, nothing remained but ash, glass, and the smell of magnolias. The official report called it a fire accident. No remains were recovered. Not Boone's. Not the creatures. The sheriff closed the case. The journal vanished from evidence. Charleston exhaled, pretending again that monsters only lived in stories. But Crow never forgot. He left the city months later, haunted by what he saw. They said he went north, joined the railroad, never spoke Boone's name again. But in 1863, during the war, a Union officer reported a strange sight near the old marshes. A man walking the riverbank at dusk, tall and pale, wearing a long coat that gleamed like polished leather. The locals say he still appears before great storms, humming softly, magnolias blooming where his footprints fall, and deep beneath the black water, something still beats, slow, steady, patient, waiting to be made whole again. Charleston awoke to the sound of fear. By dawn, the gossip had outpaced the tide. Some said the constables found walls lined with stretched flesh. Others whispered that Dr. Isaac Mortimer had vanished through the marsh before they broke his door. Whatever the truth was, one fact remained. The people of Charleston were terrified to even breathe the same air he once did. The Mortimer house, a grand Georgian mansion on East Bay Street, stood cordoned by soldiers. Curtains fluttered in broken windows. The scent of rot, sweet and chemical, drifted down the street. They said even the rats wouldn't enter. Captain Samuel Reeves of the Charleston Guard was the first to descend the cellar stairs that morning. He carried a lantern, and behind him trailed two men, one a priest, the other a surgeon. The cellar door creaked open like a throat gasping its last breath. What they found inside would not be written in any official record. Not entirely. The walls shimmered, slick with oil. Rows of pale leather sheets hung from hooks, each piece marked with pores, faint freckles, or the soft trail of a spine. Reeves lifted his lantern, and the light touched something that looked like a coat. Human skin, tanned and stitched into form, with buttons sewn from bone. The surgeon turned pale, whispering, "God have mercy." He made garments. Reeves said nothing. He only stared at the far wall, where shelves lined with glass jars glimmered faintly. Inside them floated organs, sealed in amber fluid, hearts, lungs, eyes, each labeled neatly in Mortimer's hand. Subject 3, seam integrity failed after 6 hours. Subject 5, retained elasticity. Blood drained successfully. And there, nailed to a wooden beam, was a diagram. It showed the outline of a man, with red ink marking where the skin could be harvested most efficiently. But perhaps the most terrifying thing was the sound, faint, rhythmic, coming from behind the far wall. They tore away the boards. Behind them, a room no bigger than a coffin, a makeshift operating chamber. The table was still wet. Shackles dangled from both ends, and lying upon it was something that once resembled a man, but whose face was gone. Stripped clean, the priest dropped to his knees. The surgeon vomited. Reeves only stared. When they brought the body up, the light hit the torn flesh, and the crowd gathered in silence. Someone screamed, then another, until the sound rolled through the street like a tide of madness. Mothers pulled children inside. The bell of St. Michael's tolled as though for the dead. By evening, the city was a wound, open, throbbing, afraid. But here's the part no one spoke of. When Reeves ordered the rest of the cellars searched, they found a narrow corridor leading into the marsh tunnels. And in those tunnels were footprints, fresh ones. Isaac Mortimer was gone. The search parties combed the marshes for 3 days. They found scraps of cloth, a medical satchel, and blood in the water. But no body. The theory was that he drowned. Others claimed they saw a pale figure walking near the rice fields, barefoot, dragging something behind him. And yet, weeks later, the killings resumed. In the alleys behind the taverns, drunks vanished. In the quarters near the harbor, workers disappeared on their way home. The bodies never turned up, but people spoke of screams echoing at night from the old drainage tunnels. And sometimes, when the moonlight hit the fog just right, it looked as though someone, or something, was moving beneath the surface of the marsh. In early October, a letter arrived at the Charleston Medical Board. It was signed, simply, Dr. I. Mortimer. It read, "You called me a monster for pursuing what you feared to understand, yet the skin remembers what we do not, every pain, every touch, every lie. I have found a way to keep it alive, to make it speak. Soon Charleston will see the truth of its own flesh." The handwriting was shaky, but it was undeniably his. The city fell into hysteria. Doors were barred at sunset, markets closed early, and no one dared walk the marsh road. Even the dogs refused to go near the old house. Then, one night, smoke rose from East Bay Street. The Mortimer house was burning. By the time they arrived, it was a skeleton of fire. But through the flames, witnesses swore they saw a man standing in the window, his body wrapped in pale fabric, his skin glowing red in the light. Some said it was Mortimer. Others said it was something he had made. The house collapsed before anyone could reach it. By morning, only ashes remained. But among those ashes, Captain Reeves found something, a single glass jar, unbroken, buried in soot. Inside floated a hand. On the wrist, a small tag written in Mortimer's hand, "Mine." For years after, children would dare each other to walk past the ruins at night. They said if you listened close enough, you could still hear the walls breathing, and every so often, when the fog crept low over Charleston, the lantern men on the docks would swear they saw someone standing on the shoreline, dressed in pale skin, staring back at the city that had banished him. A figure that shimmered like wax, waiting. The ruins of the Mortimer estate lay silent for years. Grass swallowed the stone steps, vines consumed the gates, and what was once the proud Georgian mansion of Dr. Isaac Mortimer had become a memory whispered only in darkness. Charleston rebuilt itself, brick by brick, pretending that the horror had been sealed under the soil, but memory lingers even when men choose to forget. The sea air still carried a faint chemical tang, the kind that reminded old sailors of the night they saw the house burn. And sometimes, on still evenings, dogs would howl for no reason, staring toward the marsh where the doctor had vanished. It wasn't until 1856, 4 years after the fire, that the nightmare stirred again. Stevedore, named Benjamin Hart, was unloading crates near the wharf when he stumbled upon something half buried in the mud. At first he thought it was a rag, tangled in seaweed. But when he pulled, it resisted, and a pale shape rolled toward him. It was a man's face, empty, like a mask peeled from flesh. The police tried to claim it was an old medical specimen, perhaps washed from the university's collection. But those who saw it up close said the skin was fresh. Too fresh, and the stitching along the edges, identical to Mortimer's preserved works found years earlier. Captain Reeves, now older and with a streak of gray across his beard, was called back to investigate. He never wanted to set foot in that name again, but something about the discovery gnawed at him. He still kept that jar in his desk drawer, the one labeled "Mine." Sometimes, when the candlelight flickered, He could swear the hand inside twitched. Reeves followed the evidence inland. Bodies weren't being found whole, only fragments. Patches of skin left behind, carefully cut, sometimes folded, as though whoever took them had changed their mind. There was method in the madness, precision. Witnesses described a figure wandering the marshes after midnight. Tall, barefoot, covered in what looked like a shroud, or several of them sewn together. They called him the White Man of the Reeds, but Reeves knew that gait, that limp, that silhouette. Mortimer was alive. The question was, in what state? By autumn, disappearances became weekly. Farmers found fences painted in something that wasn't paint, cattle skinned with surgical precision. One woman, an innkeeper, swore that a man knocked at her door asking for shelter from the storm. She said his voice trembled, polite but wrong, as though every syllable had been stitched together. She offered him soup. When she returned with the bowl, he was gone. But on the chair lay a glove made of skin. Reeves gathered a small group of men, lantern bearers, soldiers and one preacher, to descend into the marsh tunnels again. This time they carried rifles and salt. The moon was full, hanging over the water like a cracked coin. As they reached the old passage beneath the burned estate, the smell hit them first, formaldehyde and decay. Then came the sound, a slow dragging noise like wet fabric against stone. The tunnel widened into a low chamber, and there, against the wall, stood something that had once been a man. The lantern light quivered as they realized what they were seeing. It was Mortimer, or what remained of him. His face was patchwork, jaw reassembled from someone else's. His skin shimmered faintly in the light, translucent in places, reinforced in others. His eyes were sewn open. He turned, bones creaking, and spoke through lips that weren't his. "Do you know what the body remembers, Captain?" He said softly. "Every pain, every love. The skin carries it all. I only tried to give it a voice." Reeves raised his rifle, hands shaking. "You murdered them," he whispered. Mortimer smiled, or tried to. The expression cracked his cheek. "I freed them," he said. "I let them live beyond the rot." He took a step forward. The sound of stretched flesh echoed against the walls. Reeves fired. The shot tore through the doctor's chest, and Mortimer staggered, laughing. His voice was wet, gurgling, but full of something almost divine. "I told you. It remembers." Then he fell. His body hit the water, sending up a spray of blood and brine. The men watched as the pale mass began to sink. But before it vanished completely, something floated to the surface. A piece of skin. Not torn, unbuttoned. They sealed the tunnels that night. The preacher declared the ground cursed, and salt was spread from the marsh to the street. Reeves resigned soon after, retreating into silence. He never spoke of what he saw except once, to his wife before he died. He told her that when he burned Mortimer's remains, the flesh moved. It twisted toward the light as though alive. And when the fire died, there was nothing left. Nothing but a smell of formaldehyde and lilacs. But Charleston never truly buried its ghosts. In 1861, during the first gunfire of the Civil War, soldiers digging trenches near the old Mortimer property uncovered something that made even the hardened men fall silent. Beneath the soil, perfectly preserved in wax and salt, lay dozens of faces, masks of townsfolk long gone. Each one labeled, dated, arranged in neat rows. The youngest face bore the date 1856. The last one, 1859, 3 years after Mortimer's supposed death, meaning someone continued his work. And though the original house was long gone, locals claimed to see flickering lights beneath the ground when fog rolled through. The kind of light that shimmered faintly, like a lantern behind stretched skin. They say the body of Dr. Isaac Mortimer was never truly destroyed. That the skin, his masterpiece, when was still out there, worn by something that remembered everything he ever did. And even today, when Charleston's tide recedes and the marsh air grows heavy, some swear they can hear the faint whisper of stitched lips beneath the earth, murmuring in a voice not entirely human, "The skin remembers." Charleston changed after the war. The fire, the famine, the blood. It all washed through her streets and left behind ghosts that never slept. But the city, stubborn and proud, rebuilt itself again. Gas lamps replaced candles, the iron fences gleamed, and merchants once more called out from Market Street. Yet beneath the cobblestones and prayers, something old remained, something that had been waiting. In 1872, 20 years after the name Mortimer had last been whispered aloud, construction workers digging a new sewer line unearthed a sealed brick chamber. The foreman thought it was just another war-era storage vault. But when they pried open the hatch, a stench poured out that made grown men fall to their knees. Inside the chamber lay racks, iron racks, arranged in precise order, and hanging from them were sheets of flesh, perfectly preserved. Some were tagged with dates, others with names, the handwriting identical to Dr. Isaac Mortimer's. The city sealed the chamber immediately. The newspapers never mentioned it. But someone took one of the jars before the door was closed again. The jar reappeared months later in the hands of a physician named Dr. Elijah Moore, a quiet man who taught anatomy at the Medical College of South Carolina. He presented it to his students as a historical medical relic, an example of early tissue preservation. Inside the jar was a strip of skin no larger than a man's forearm, preserved in amber fluid, and on its surface, faintly visible beneath the fluid, was something strange. Writing. Tiny, scratched words. It looked as though someone had carved a message into the flesh itself, as if it were parchment. Dr. Moore thought it was a prank, until he magnified the letters. It read, "I see you, doctor. I remember your touch." Moore dismissed it as coincidence. He stored the jar in his private collection, but after that day he began to change. His colleagues said he stopped sleeping. He wore gloves all the time, even indoors. Students whispered that he kept talking to his specimens when he thought no one was listening. And then, one evening, a janitor entered Moore's office and found the doctor sitting perfectly still in his chair, pale, cold, and bare from the waist up. His chest had been flayed, not slashed, not torn, carefully peeled, like the opening of a book. On the wall behind him, written in blood, were the same words, "The skin remembers." The jar was gone. Rumors swarmed through the college, and though the administration tried to bury it, something darker began to crawl back into Charleston's veins. There were whispers of grave robbers digging near the old marsh tunnels, of strange footprints seen at dawn, barefoot but heavy, dragging something behind. One fisherman swore he caught sight of a pale figure under the water, not drowning, but watching, as if the tide itself carried eyes. By 1874, the disappearances began again. But this time, they weren't the poor or the desperate. They were doctors, surgeons, men of medicine. Whoever, or whatever, was behind it seemed to be hunting those who practiced Mortimer's craft. In November of that year, Captain Samuel Reeves's son, Daniel Reeves, now a deputy in the Charleston Constabulary, was called to investigate the disappearance of another physician. The name written in the report stopped him cold, Dr. Elijah Moore. Daniel had grown up hearing his father's nightmares. The jars, the cellar, the man made of skin. He'd dismissed them as legend, until now. He followed the trail to the edge of the marsh, near the ruins of the Mortimer estate. And there, in the cold fog, he found tracks, bare feet pressed deep into the mud. They led toward the tree line, to a clearing where the soil looked recently disturbed. He dug, and when his spade struck something hollow, he knelt down and brushed the earth away with his hands. It was a coffin, but not of wood, of skin, sewn tightly, bound with thread that shimmered silver in the moonlight. Inside it lay the body of Dr. Elijah Moore, or most of it. His face was missing. But Daniel saw something worse. The inner lining of the coffin was covered in hundreds of tiny scratches, letters carved into flesh. When he shone his lantern close, he realized they formed sentences, names, prayers, screams. It was as though every victim Mortimer had ever touched was speaking at once. Daniel stumbled back in horror, falling into the mud. But then he heard it. A voice, faint, wet, whispering through the reeds. "Captain." Daniel froze. That voice was older, rasping, but achingly familiar. Captain Reeves. He turned, lantern shaking, and from the fog stepped a figure, tall, wrapped in layers of pale fabric. His face glistened in the lamplight, stretched tight, almost translucent. "I told him," the figure said. "I told your father." "The flesh remembers." Daniel raised his pistol. "Who are you?" The figure took another step forward, the light catching his face, and beneath the stitched seams, Daniel saw it. A patch of skin that bore a faded tattoo. His father's initials. Sard, the pistol dropped from his hand. "No," Daniel whispered. Mortimer's voice rasped softly, almost tender. "He gave himself to me, to preserve what he could not forget." Then, with a movement that defied the stiffness of death, the figure pressed his hand to his own chest, and Daniel saw beneath the seams the faint outline of another face, one trying to push through from within. His father's. They found Daniel 2 days later, wandering the streets barefoot and bloodied. He could not speak, could not eat, could not sleep. When he was finally restrained, the doctors discovered something carved across his back. A message, etched into the skin with surgical precision. "The collector walks again." The Reeves family line ended there. For the next century, the legend of the Skin Collector became one of Charleston's many ghost stories, told to frighten children or thrill tourists on midnight tours. People laughed, took pictures by the ruins, and called it folklore, but those who lived near the marsh knew better. Every few decades, another body turned up, skinned with surgical precision. The police called it copycats. The city called it superstition. But there was always one detail the reports never explained. Each new victim bore a mark near the wrist, a small tag written in faded brown ink. And on that tag, only one word: mine. Some say the collector is still out there, not Mortimer himself, but the work that survived him, a living thing, made of memory and flesh, passed down, worn, repaired, reborn through generations of those who find his craft irresistible. Others believe the city itself keeps him alive, that Charleston, in its beauty and rot, its elegance and decay, has become his skin, a body that remembers every scream beneath its cobblestones. Because if you listen closely, when the fog rolls in from the harbor and the lamps flicker low, you can still hear the faintest sigh beneath the street, the sound of flesh breathing. And if you're unlucky enough to walk alone, you might catch the faint scent of lilac and chemicals, and feel something brush against your arm. Something that feels alive. Something that knows your name. If you love the darkness, stay with us. Subscribe before the lights go out.